Ukraine, 1991 to 2013. 1991. Ukraine declares its independence from the Soviet Union on August 24, a move that is overwhelmingly supported by Ukrainian voters in a referendum held on December 1. 1992. Months of political wrangling conclude when Ukrainian President Leonid Kravchuk and Russian President Boris Yeltsin reach accords on Soviet-era military hardware located in Ukraine. In May, Ukraine signs the Lisbon Protocol, agreeing to turn over its sizable nuclear arsenal to Russia. The following month, a preliminary deal is reached on the Sevastopol-based Black Sea Fleet, which would be administered jointly by Russia and Ukraine for a period of 3 years. 1994. On January 10, Ukraine becomes a party to the Partnership for Peace, an agreement to strengthen political and military ties with NATO. In July, Kuchma defeats Kravchuk to become president of Ukraine. Russia, Ukraine, the United States, and the United Kingdom signed the Budapest Memorandum in December, restating Ukraine's commitment to surrender its nuclear arsenal to Russia and pledging the signatories to acknowledge and respect the boundaries of Ukraine as an independent country. 1995. Ukraine joins the Council of Europe. 1996. Ukraine replaces its Soviet-era constitution with a democratic one that invests from executive power in the office of president. The hryvnia is introduced as Ukraine's currency. 1997. Ukraine and Russia conclude the Treaty of Friendship, pledging to respect each other's borders and preserve the rights of national minorities in each country. The matter of the Black Sea Fleet is settled. Russia received the bulk of the ships, an extended lease on port facilities in Sevastopol, and the right to garrison up to 25,000 troops in Crimea. Ukraine receives over $500 million in compensation, and the Russian troops in Sevastopol are subject to a status of forces agreement that states that they may not operate outside of their bases without prior approval from Ukrainian authorities. 1999. Kuchma appoints Viktor Yushchenko Prime Minister. Yushchenko introduced series of financial reform measures that are credited with turning around the Ukrainian economy. 2000. Investigative journalist Georgy Gongardze, who uncovered evidence of corruption within the Kuchma administration, is abducted in September. His decapitated body is found several months later in a forest outside Kiev. In December, the final reactor at the Chernobyl nuclear power plant is shut down. 2001. In an attempt to check his prime minister's growing popularity, Kuchma sacks Yushchenko, and Yushchenko immediately becomes one of the leading figures in the opposition to Kuchma's government. In December, Ukraine conducts its first post-independence census. The most dramatic demographic change is in Crimea, where some 250,000 Crimean Tatars have returned to the peninsula. The Crimean Tatars were internally deported by Soviet leader Joseph Stalin in 1944 and prohibited from returning to their ancestral home throughout the Soviet era. 2002. Opposition groups call for Kuchma's resignation after audio tapes surfaced that implicate him in the politically motivated killing of Gongardze. A parliamentary commission reveals that the tapes also contain evidence that Kuchma approved a $100 million arms deal with Iraq in contravention of a 1990 Security Council resolution. 2004. Ukraine is pushed to the brink of civil war as intrigue and protests around the presidential election of 2004. Kuchma, although constitutionally cleared to seek a third term, instead supports the candidacy of his prime minister, Viktor Yanukovych. Yushchenko, representing the opposition alliance Our Ukraine, suffers dioxin poisoning, allegedly at the hands of the Ukrainian State Security Service. After Yanukovych and Yushchenko finish first-round voting in a virtual tie, Yanukovych is declared the winner after a second round is held in November. Widespread demonstrations erupt as Yushchenko supporters take to the streets in a movement that comes to be known as the Orange Revolution. In December, the election results are annulled by the Supreme Court, and a second runoff is held in which Yushchenko is victorious. 2005. Yushchenko is inaugurated president in January, but his pro-Western administration is soon afflicted with the instability that would characterize his entire term in office. His first prime minister, Yulia Tymoshenko, is dismissed along with the rest of Yushchenko's cabinet after just 9 months. Tymoshenko soon emerges as Yushchenko's strongest challenger for leadership within the Orange Coalition. 2006. The Ukrainian political landscape is reshaped when Yanukovych's Party of Regions captures the largest share of votes in parliamentary elections in March. Unable to agree on a coalition with Tymoshenko despite protracted negotiations, Yushchenko is forced to form a unity government with Yanukovych as prime minister. 2007. The power struggle between Yushchenko and Yanukovych results in the dismissal of parliament and the scheduling of snap elections held in September. Although the Party of Regions remains the largest single group in parliament, the real winner is Tymoshenko, who emerges as the most recognizable political figure in Ukraine. With the bloc of Yulia Tymoshenko, BIT, providing most of its parliamentary strength, the Orange Coalition reforms, and Tymoshenko is named prime minister in December. 2009. Economic malaise grips Ukraine, and Russia halts the flow of natural gas into the country over a dispute about back payments. Tymoshenko proposes a budget that secures a multi-billion-dollar loan from the International Monetary Fund, IMF. But the IMF suspends disbursement after Party of Regions parliamentarians pass a bill that violates the terms of the agreement. 2010. Ukraine's pivot to the west is sharply arrested when Yanukovych defeats Tymoshenko in the presidential election in February. Upon taking power, he immediately moves to strengthen ties with Russia and bolster the executive power of the presidency. Yanukovych extends Russia's lease on the Crimean port of Sevastopol, secures a discounted rate on Russian natural gas, and rebuts the Yushchenko government's contention that the Great Famine of 1932-33 was a Soviet-led act of genocide against the Ukrainian people. In December, both Tymoshenko and her Interior Minister, Yuri Lutsenko, are charged with abuse of power in cases that are characterized as politically motivated by opposition leaders. 2011. In October, Tymoshenko is found guilty and sentenced to 7 years in prison. The verdict is widely criticized in the West. The following month, a new round of charges are brought against her, alleging that Tymoshenko evaded taxes while heading an energy concern in the 1990s. 2012. In February, Lutsenko is sentenced to 4 years in prison. He is sentenced to an additional 2 years in August. In parliamentary elections held in October, the Party of Regions captures the largest share of the vote, but Tymoshenko's Fatherland Party, Vitaly Klitschko's Ukrainian Democratic Alliance for Reforms, UDA, and the ultranationalist Svoboda, Freedom, Party all perform well. In December, the Party of Regions, headed by Prime Minister Mykola Ozerov, forms a government with the support of the Communist Party and independent representatives. Maidan, Crimea, and the Separatist Movement, 2013-14, April 7, 2013. Bowing to Western pressure, Yanukovych pardons Lutsenko and orders his release. Tymoshenko remains imprisoned. November 9, 2013. Yanukovych meets with Russian President Vladimir Putin in Moscow in advance of the EU's Eastern Partnership Summit in Vilnius, Lithuania. Ukraine is among the former Soviet bloc countries scheduled to sign association agreements that would expand political and economic ties with the EU. November 21, 2013. Days before the Vilnius summit, Yanukovych announces that Ukraine will suspend talks with the EU in favor of strengthening its relationship with Russia. Mass protests erupt in major cities across Ukraine over subsequent days, with an estimated 100,000 people gathering in central Kiev. Observers characterize the demonstrations as the largest in Ukraine since the Orange Revolution.